Three friends would wander off into the Pine Barrens only to have a multitude of strange and disturbing experiences with supernatural beings they could not possibly comprehend. A reservoir with tons of deaths and missing persons cases attached to it, supposedly built on top of an ancient Indian burial ground, a host of strange supernatural beings residing in the Pine Barrens, and a strange UFO object seen by an Air Force pilot. You guys will not want to miss today's episode. Now, it was on this night that Sullivan and two of his friends, Alex and Ted, were just hanging around, spending time together, driving around in their car, just looking for things to do to go and hang out. And at some point or another, one of Sullivan's friends had mentioned, hey guys, we should go to this really cool lake that's located right between Central and North Jersey, and maybe just go down the trail, go and watch the sunset at the lake. It'll be a great time. It'll just be us guys. And so they all agreed unanimously that that would be a great idea. So acting quickly, they go over towards the parking area, they get out of their car, and they start towards the trailhead on the trail towards where the lake would be. Now, at this point in the evening, the sun's kind of starting to set lower in the sky. They're surrounded by beautiful foliage, and they're all very stoked about getting to go down this trail to go hang out by the lake and just watch the sun slowly descend behind the horizon and just get to hang out in nature. I mean, who doesn't love that? And so while they're on the trail, they're kind of just laughing and joking and talking to each other. But Sullivan is already a little off-put because he has a lot of Native American blood in him. And of course, he felt that that really made him prone to other supernatural things trying to contact him, as well as being prone to sightings and encounters of the strange and supernatural. And as we're about to find out, folks, well, he wouldn't be wrong. So as they're on this trail walking and talking, Sullivan's friend, Ted, decides to start bringing up the subject of the supernatural and cryptids and weird things like that to try and make it more spooky. And of course, they're still laughing and joking. And at one point or another, Ted decides to pull up some supposed goat man sounds on his phone to really try and freak out his two friends, Alex and Sullivan. I mean, after all, they are on native land, so Ed figured maybe this might conjure something that is actually there. And of course, Ted is still messing around with them, and he says, hey guys, there's something up ahead of us, and the other two guys just called his bluff, and they're laughing at him. And as he's playing that goat man sound like I described, Alex, the other friend, described how it sounded like a skinwalker. Now, apparently, according to Sullivan, that if you're on native land, you can't use that word because it will only draw attention to the group of people who apparently use that word. Sullivan clarified that they were the only three on the trail that evening. There was nobody else around them. There was nobody else visible behind or in front of them in any way. Nobody else in the woods. It was just them. It was very isolating. Not even 2 minutes after Alex had apparently used the word Skinwalker to describe the sound of the Goatman recording, they all described witnessing this very slender, gaunt figure following them off in the distance behind them. Even Sullivan noted that it was very weird that it just kind of came out of nowhere, and none of them had ever recalled hearing footsteps or rustling in the bushes, nothing. It's as if whatever or whoever this was maintaining perfect silence while following these three boys. Now keep in mind that it was only momentarily that Sullivan first saw it, in which the other two responded to him looking, and they all saw it together. Now, what's also interesting is that Alex and Ted noted how as soon as they saw it, they also smelt it. What they would describe as this rancid, putrid odor, which is completely synonymous to seeing a supernatural entity, or in this case, a skinwalker. Now, one thing they noted as they're trying to pick up their pace and move away from this thing is that it was moving very slowly. It seemed in no rush to catch up to these guys, and it was just kind of staying back, just kind of creeping its way along the trail, keeping its distance. And of course, they were very disturbed by this, as anybody would be, and they really picked up their pace to try and keep more distance between them and this thing. And so after they had quickened their pace and had created a substantial amount of distance between whatever this thing was, and them, they reached an area in the trail where it was more open. There was a road nearby with a lot of cars roaring through, and at this point, they all felt relatively safe that they can now slow their pace back to a normal speed and just leisurely go on as usual. Now, as they got to this point and realized their false sense of security, Sullivan decides to turn around to see how far away this thing is now, and to their horror, they realize that this thing now has caught up to them and is only roughly 100 feet away from them. Now, at this point, since they're only 100 feet away, they can make out a lot more of the details of it, which completely petrified them. And just like before, they noticed that as it was creeping its way closer and closer, it now picking up pace, they noticed it was not making any sounds as it moved, which seemed impossible due to the foliage and just the surroundings and the settings they were in. And judging by what they were looking at and what they saw, they decided to book it and not waste any more time, so they flee down the trail all the way back to their car, and they noticed that there were no other cars in the parking lot. They were the only ones there. So at this point, it kind of just rationalized in their brain that whoever was here has been in the woods for a little while, or it's a creeper, or someone's lurking around. Just things are not adding up. It's weird. And by the time they all raced back to their car, jumped in the car, and pulled out of there, they're looking, of course, out the windows and seeing if they could spot it. They can't. From their view, whatever it was that had followed them seems to have vanished entirely, or at least didn't follow them close enough to the end of the trail where it could be visibly seen. Now, on that note, fast forward one day later, and Sullivan was at home at his house walking his dogs outside, and as he's about to be done and take his dogs back in the house, he notices a cat coming out of the woods but heading directly towards him. Now, just having native blood in him and being a little wiser than most regular folk who aren't very well versed in the supernatural, he was very well aware that skinwalkers can take the form of just about any animal it wanted to. And so he's automatically paranoid, thinking that this is a skinwalker or something that I shouldn't be around. I don't know who this cat is or what it is. I want nothing to do with it. So he takes the dogs, he goes back inside. It's the end of that. Now at that point, he gets a call from his good friend Ted, who he just hung out with the other day. You know, they went to that lake area and they had that whole experience. And so apparently the plan was that Sullivan was going to go and pick up Ted in his car, bring him back to Sullivan's house, and they were just going to spend the rest of the night playing video games and just dinking around and just being buddies. Well, that kind of happened. And so Sullivan goes to pick up Ted, and Ted gets in the car. They go back to Sullivan's house, and as soon as they get back to the house, not out of the car, mind you, but just pulling up to the house, Ted is immediately like, you know, man, I can't do this. I don't want to be here. I'm just feeling immense amounts of dread. Something is really wrong. And so Sullivan is completely understanding of his feelings, and so they just decided to go and drive around for a little while and just try and maybe pass some time and hoping that those feelings do subside. Well, here is the creepiest part of the stories. You see, a few days after this is when Ted decides to tell Sullivan, you know, man, that night, just a few nights ago when we were supposed to play video games and hang out at your house, and I got that really dreadful feeling, well, I saw it outside your house, the same thing that we saw at that park. The being or animal or creature, whatever it is that you guys want to call it, what they described, what they saw was a gaunt, slender, humanoid form of some kind that apparently had no face, almost skeletal, and very, very tall. Even the descriptions right now are honestly giving me goosebumps. It is creeping me out because I've personally heard many stories about this same sort of entity that these guys had encountered. Now, Sullivan firmly believes that what they encountered, due to the name Skinwalker being used on native land, that it was indeed a shape-shifting witch of some kind, or who knows, it could be some sort of other supernatural entity. There is no conclusion. And this part of the story is left a mystery. But the plot continues to deepen because this is not where the circle of the supernatural ends, ladies and gentlemen. One of Sullivan's good friends, whom he calls Harold, saw what he can describe as a wolf-like creature similar to what they saw at the park. Now, what's very interesting is that Sullivan's friend Harold actually had this experience in the Pine Barrens. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Pine Barrens, it is a very large forested area located in New Jersey, and the Pine Barrens is home to all sorts of crazy supernatural things and sightings and happenings. The Jersey Devil is probably one of the most infamous things to have come out of the Pine Barrens. Many people, almost I think every year, have some sort of story or sighting of this creature, not to mention the mass amount of UFO sightings and just other strange supernatural, dare I say, missing 411 phenomena, things that can't really be explained, and a host of other things like dogman, Bigfoot. I can go on and on, folks. You get the idea. The Pine Barrens is a very strange place. So when I personally read that his friend had a strange sighting he couldn't explain in this particular area, I knew they were onto something. Something, in my opinion, that makes Harold a little bit more credible than just a regular Joe Blow is that, like many of the hikers and outdoorsmen who've experienced strange things, is very well versed in the outdoors. In fact, I would say probably more so than some of these other cats who've had experiences, judging by the fact that they actually graduated with a bachelor's degree in environmental science and have spent copious amounts of hours in their free time hiking and just traversing all through the New Jersey wilderness. Harold even worked as a naturalist in the Batstow Village in Wharton State Forest for a little bit of time, which, for those that don't know, is actually the largest state forest within the New Jersey Pine Barrens. And as a matter of fact, got into an internship there and was then given a job before his internship ended with them because of his advanced knowledge of all the flora and fauna that surrounded them. Now, why is this important? Well, because Harold is a very analytical, rational kind of person. And then this is somebody who, when they see an animal out in the woods, 100% of the time, they're so well versed in the outdoors that they can pretty much identify what animal this is. And while they are open, they being Harold, to the idea that, cryptids could be a thing and that if the biological ecosystem can support it, sure, why not? But the whole supernatural aspect of it and a bipedal canine just seemed far too far-fetched for Harold to wrap his mind around. And so one evening, Harold decided to go hang out with his two buddies, Chris and Alan, who were busy off-roading in an area near Manchester, New Jersey. Now, Harold can't exactly recall the specific area this was in, but it was close to the abandoned brick factory. Now, of course, with this, they were hanging out with other friends and just having fun doing some off-roading in and around the dirt trails of this area, just having a blast hanging out and not worrying about school or jobs or women or anything of that sort. Harold was also completely sober and did not partake in any alcohol or cannabis. He was also in the truck with his friend Alan, who was also completely sober, and their friend Chris, who was sitting in the back, who had partook in a little bit of cannabis, so he was just a little bit high, but still very functional, still very much grounded in reality. And so keep in mind that they're getting ready to leave, and they're going to head back to the main road, but they're still off-roading. And so Harold is driving, and so Alan, his friend, is like, hey, as we're driving, just make sure you keep a lookout for deer, because as we all know, guys, deers do have a tendency to jump out right in the middle of the road, and bam, well, you either get a totaled car or a dead deer, or probably both. Now, keep in mind as well that the dirt path they were driving on was also fairly open. I mean, we're talking roughly about 30 feet from side of the road to the other side of the road. And they're about slap dab in the middle, so if a deer happened to jump out, well, they would have time to respond appropriately. Now, as Harold is driving the truck and they're on this dirt road going down, Harold spots something off to his left out of his peripheral vision, and all he could see is this large brown patch of fur, and he's thinking, oh crap, it's a deer. It's totally gonna jump out and trying to commit suicide. So he's like, oh crap. So he's bracing himself to be ready for this deer to jump out. But then he notices that this deer suddenly picks up the pace, speeds up probably enough to where it can get about 20 feet ahead of the vehicle, still in the tree line, mind you, and then it finally, bam, jumps right out in the middle of the dirt path in front of the oncoming truck. Now, as soon as it landed, bam, it literally cleared the rest of the dirt road within what Harold described would be about 2 or 3 steps, completely vanishing off into the opposite side of the road in the brush and the forest. Harold was completely taken aback because whatever this animal was, what he thought was a deer, actually landed on its hind legs and stood up and operated on 2 legs bipedally. Now, Harold can only really begin to guesstimate its height using his friend's lifted truck as a reference, but his guess is it was around 7 or 8 feet in height. And in just that short amount of time, he was able to make some very obvious observations about this animal, and that all over its body, it was covered in a dark brown fur, but notice that the chest and stomach area had a lighter coat of fur on it. And also noticed that the muscle definition was so pronounced, you could see it rippling all over its body. And in fact, he likened it to an Olympic runner's body. Very well toned, very well defined, not necessarily ripped out and buffed like in 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger, but very lean in tone. Now, he also went on to describe the head, which he described was a very large canine head, large wolf ears that were perked up, a very long snout, and eyes that he would describe would reflect this unnatural light unknown to the entirety of the animal kingdom, or at least the known animal kingdom. He would go on to describe its arms and how they were unnaturally long and just like a man's arms, with large hands, each with digited claws that looked like they could do some real severe damage. And of course, this is all within a few seconds of time, because as soon as this thing jumped out in the middle of the road, they slam on the brakes, they come to a screeching halt, this thing jumps in the opposite side of the woods, and they're all just thinking like, what the crap did we just see? And funny enough, Chris, who's in the back seat, says, listen guys, I know I'm a little stoned, but what was that? And so both Chris and Alan just look at Harold, because they know he's the nature animal nerd, and they say, okay, nature boy, what did we just see? This has to be explainable. What is this? And of course, Harold is sitting there about to literally crap bricks out of his pants, and he's thinking, I don't know. I have no logical reasoning or explanation in any realm of science or the animal kingdom that I could put 2 and 2 together to explain what we just saw on this road. None of it makes sense. Now, what's interesting is Harold would speak about how his friend Alan, the guy with the truck, actually is a pretty stern atheist and completely refuses to believe in any supernatural hocus pocus and does not have anywhere near an open mind. But interestingly, this experience must have really spooked him, because apparently he refuses to talk about it or even acknowledge it that it ever happened. And even now, to this very day, Harold really struggles with the experience, because in terms of science and biology, there is nothing that could remotely support this thing existing, but yet they had this sighting, they had the experience. There is no way to logically explain what it is they saw that night. For Harold, it still remains a mystery. The story keeps going. You see, this next story involves another person in this large friend circle by the name of George, who him and his brother were really good friends with Harold from the last story. And George firmly believes that his account is very similar to that of Harold's, and what he saw, well, he believes it was the same thing. What's also very interesting is that George's sighting, or account, whatever you want to call it, takes place pretty much in the abandoned brick factory in Manchester, New Jersey. Now, for a little bit of backstory, George and his older brother and Harold had already hung out all together at this same location, and Harold had warned him to never come back here at night, because I guess Harold has had some pretty haunting, strange, and bizarre experiences before in the past that really bothered him. He really didn't feel that the area was safe to be in after dark, and he kept warning George and his brother, but George just thought he was trying to, build drama and to really be like, oh, it's spooky, don't come back here. So he kind of just was like, yeah, okay, whatever, I'm still totally gonna come back here at night, which he did, and that's part of the reason it led to his experience that I'm about to tell you. So one evening, George and a couple of his friends decide to go on the path that leads right to the abandoned brick factory, and as they make their way down there, they begin feeling this strange sensation that washes over them, a sensation like they shouldn't really be there and that they have eyes all around them watching them. it kind of makes a little antsy, like they shouldn't be there. And so George and his friends are getting really creeped out by this, and they're kind of looking around and they're looking for any reason that they feel this strange presence and they don't feel welcome. And so they're going down this path and they notice something out of place right up ahead on the path. It's something that George describes as being impossible to exist, but yet here it is right in front of them. This thing was just standing right in the middle of the pathway, looking at these guys standing there, all completely petrified in fear. And what George described was a tall, probably roughly 9 to 10 feet tall bipedal wolf-looking creature, glowing yellow eyes, large muscular body, almost identical to the description that Harold gave. But he described the head being much more similar to that of a wolf or a German shepherd. In fact, he even claimed that it reminded him more of an Egyptian jackal, kind of like the Anubis guardians, you know what I'm talking about. But of course, as he's seeing this, he's trying to rationalize it in his head, thinking like, this can't be real. There's no way this is possible. And he's blinking his eyes. And of course, in the midst of that, because he thinks he's dreaming, his friends are also reacting to what he's seeing. So he's like, oh crap, this is real. And this thing's looking at him and kind of just moving very slowly, if not even moving at all, acting very predatory, almost beckoning them to come closer to it. It was almost as if it was waiting for the perfect moment to strike, almost staying perfectly still, waiting until they were close enough to do something. George felt like they were in complete and utter danger, that their lives were at stake, so all the friends decided to just turn and run as soon as this thing disappeared from any sort of visible sight around them. They have no idea if it had more sinister plans or what would have even took place had they ventured closer to this thing. Now, I just want to be clear here that in case you didn't know, the abandoned brick factory is actually located in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Now, this particular abandoned brick factory is more commonly known as the Brooks Bray Brick Factory. And while it never fully went into operation, it was at one point or another in its heyday ready to pump out thousands of bricks a day. But unfortunately, its owner, William Kelly, died before that could happen, and his estate and the factory were completely frozen. So when you hear this kind of stuff happening, you start to think, okay, there's definitely something happening in the Pine Barrens, but what? We don't know. But whatever it is, it has been here for many, many years. Now, this next story is really interesting because, again, it stays within the circle of friends, as I like to call it. This is actually a story from Sullivan's girlfriend from back in 2018 when she was actually going door to door selling cable packages to the people in the town of Cape May, New Jersey. Now, fun little fact about this area is that the Cape May Wildlife Refuge area, which is kind of like a swampy, marshy forest area, is literally a stone's throw away from this area that she was in, if that gives any sort of idea to the things that she could or could not encounter in this area. I will leave that imaginative part up to you. Now, as she was going door to door trying to sell these cable and Wi-Fi packages to these small townsfolk, she just kept getting this feeling that things were off, that everybody was on, I don't want to say high alert, but that their guard was up, that something just wasn't right. It was just this really unsettling atmosphere to the whole town. And so she's just trying to get through her shift and get done with her route. And so she's chugging a Red Bull, just trying to power through this and get it done, despite how uncomfortable she currently is. And she, of course, for the life of her, could not figure out why so many of these people seemed on edge. What did they have to be on edge about? Now, because this area is so tiny and small, it is also very beautiful, very scenic, a lot of trees, a lot of nature. It is a nice little getaway town, if that was your sort of thing. Now, she describes that on the last bit of her route, she had to go through this peninsula because there was a few houses on it. And so she kind of had her snake her way on the route all the way down there, which required her to go down this very long road, past a summer camp, past a trailer park, past more woods, to where she would finally find herself in this open, kind of marshy, swampy area. And of course, you know, here there was some shore access and a couple of nice, smaller, expensive houses close by. Now, as she's going up to these houses, knocking on the door, giving them her pitch, she's kind of just in awe because these houses, not only are they very expensive, but she noted how each house kind of has its own theme, and she was just kind of taken aback and like, wow, like they really did a number to make sure that these houses had their own identity, and a lot of money were put into them, and they're really nice. But she also noticed while she's checking out these houses that the sun was only setting more and more, and it was getting dark very, very quickly. And of course, being a smaller female with almost pretty much no cell service, this is pretty much just a bunch of red flags waiting to happen. For any shorter females out there, sorry, I'm not trying to call you short, you can only imagine how terrifying this would be to be put in this sort of situation. So she's thinking, you know what, I gotta end the route now. I really need to head back. I do not want to be stuck out here after dark by myself. Cell phone ain't working. This is not good. So she starts to walk back down the road towards her vehicle, and she immediately notices that something is off around her, that the woods and the air of the atmosphere is just so still and silent. It's almost so silent you could just jab it and stab it and cut it with the knife. It is that deathly quiet. I mean, I'm talking no crickets, no birds, nothing. All the noise and life and sounds that she had heard upon coming in to check out this route in the houses that were there were now gone. Now she's making a mental note of this, walking around and thinking like, where did all the sounds go? She immediately gets this sensation wash over her that she's being watched. And immediately she gets the chills, like something really bad is about to happen. She could feel the dread in her gut. Now, of course, being a shorter female in this area, you can only imagine all the things that are probably running through this poor girl's mind, like, I'm gonna get murdered, something really bad is about to happen. And as she's trying to process what's going on, she notices a large animal up ahead kind of wander into the middle of the road. And because the sunlight at this point is practically dying, no pun intended, she's having a really hard time making out what it is directly in front of her. Is it a bear? Is it a dog? No, but she's really confused because as she's staring at whatever animal this is, she notes how large it is and is confused because it doesn't have the shape of a bear, but dogs don't get this big, so what could this be? And as she's also looking at this thing, observing it, she's noticed that this thing has not noticed her. And within seconds, this thing turns its head and faces towards her because it has now noticed her. Now, I want to reiterate here that the amount of light had died down so much that she couldn't really make out a lot of details. I mean, specifics like what its face looked like, but she did get a pretty good idea of the outline, and her best description was that this was not a black bear, even though it matched the size of an extremely large black bear. But her description is that it looked like a large wolf on steroids, and that its outline, especially the head, was very similar to that of a wolf or a German shepherd, and the snout was also very long. And so she realizes that the only sound at this point that she could even remotely hear is the sound of her palpitating heart, and her breath is starting to quicken and hasten, and she's starting to feel the adrenaline course through her blood, and she's not sure what's about to happen. All she knows is that she's looking at some unidentified wild animal that does not fit the flora and fauna of New Jersey's wilderness. But she recalls that she took control of the situation and claimed that, you know what, she didn't even know how big coyotes are supposed to get, and somehow convinced herself that what she was looking at due to the poor lighting conditions was maybe just an oversized coyote or big dog. And in fact, big dogs or oversized coyotes can hopefully be scared off by obnoxious loud noises, right? So without wanting to stand there any longer, because she did not want to come off as aggressive or territorial to this thing. I mean, she didn't even know if it was in her territory to begin with. That would not be good. So she starts making the most hideous, loudest, obnoxious, screaming noises she possibly could to try and make herself seem like she could chase it away. And as soon as she did this, she noticed that its demeanor and body language changed almost immediately to the defensive, and then quickly took off in the woods behind her. And the way she would describe it was if this thing had looked at her and decided that she really wasn't worth its time, and so it decided to leave. And so upon this, she quickly turns around and takes her golden opportunity and flees back down the road, the area in which she came, you know, where the shoreline axis is and the three houses, hoping for some sort of solace away from whatever unknown animal this was. And so she's sprinting down the road, running all the way to where where she comes to the summer camp area and actually notices that there is a street light shining right above a picnic table. And so she takes this as a great opportunity to jump up on the table, catch her breath, and she's sitting there holding her body. She's terrified out of her mind, and she's breathing and panting, and she's looking at the woods around her, just waiting to see the silhouette of that thing appear and come after her. And so she's just in anticipation of getting ready to die, basically. Now, as she's sitting there for a few moments catching her breath, she realizes she's actually really close to the next house that she was scheduled to visit. So when the coast is clear, she quickly gets off the table and runs full speed towards this house. Now, upon getting to the door, she collects herself and cleans herself up and regains her composure. And what's nice for her is she met this really lovely family who actually ended up buying a Wi-Fi or cable package from her and made her feel very at home, very comfortable, enough so that she could actually start to talk about her experience that she just had. Now, here's where it gets really strange. The lady of the family, who she presumed to be the mother, kept saying, "Why would they send you out here by yourself? This is a very dangerous area. These woods are very dangerous at night, and there's a lot of creepy people around." You know how when people tell us things, you can kind of just read between the lines and pick up on their body language and their demeanor? Well, she did the same thing, and she would talk about how this lady really kind of was dropping hints that there's some unknown animal encounters in the area that can't be explained, and apparently there are a lot of ex-convicts in the area, as well as people who've done some pretty nasty things who should be arrested also in the area. What a lovely setting for a female at night. But this woman also expressed her concern that she was equally concerned about the people who lived and were around this area, and that this young woman should have never been here by herself at all. In fact, this woman was so concerned for this young woman's safety, she was like, "You need to contact your team leader and have them pick you up right now. No ifs, ands, or buts. It is far too dangerous to go outside at this time. And if you have any other scheduled stops that you're supposed to do after our house, I strongly advise you do not do them. Your safety is more important." So it really makes her wonder when she looks back at it, did the townsfolk and people around there actually know about some of the strange animal encounters? Did they know about this supposed large canine that lived around in the woods? Is that why they were so tense and on edge? It's hard to say, but for her, the entire thing is still a mystery and cannot be explained. But one thing is certain, that judging by what this lady had told her, there are people in that area that do know things that are going on. It's just, they just don't really want to talk about it. Now, one of the last stories in this circle of friends actually goes back and circles back around to Ted, who had a sighting of his own in 2019. So this was sometime later in the year, and Ted was in his own bed, tossing and turning, just really suffering from a very sleepless night. He was very fatigued, very tired, and decided, you know what, maybe I should just get up, go to use the bathroom, go down to the kitchen, have myself a little snack, and that's exactly what he did. So he gets up out of bed, wanders over to the bathroom, does his business, makes his way down to the kitchen, is looking around, scrounging. He finds a good snack to eat and wanders his way towards the living room, apparently towards the back side of the house, which, by the way, is, I'm told, still on the second story of the house. And as he's looking out the back window, he notices movement in the backyard and notices that what he's looking at is something that completely defies any rational explanation. Now, it's a good thing to note that his backyard is huge and very open, and there's really nothing in it besides two trees, one of which had fallen down and had completely rotted. So the presence of this entity was very much attention grabbing. He noticed that a little bit past the rotted tree was this large, dark figure with what he would describe as glowing red eyes and a very large head and snout. And he would describe this thing's physique as extremely muscular, not like the whole Olympic bodybuilder like I told you guys earlier, the whole lean athletic body. This thing was jacked, it was ripped. And in this case, I want you to think Arnold Schwarzenegger from the 1980s. I mean, this thing could just He also noted jet black fur and that this thing seemed very angry and aggressive, that he had noticed it. Something interesting that he also noted was that it had something on its head. I'm not talking like a helmet or anything like that. I'm talking that it was either two things, that its ears were so long or that it had antlers of some kind. Either way, there was something there. But anyway, this creature took a sniff and looked directly at him up in the window. And upon catching his gaze, looking at it, it got really aggressive, bared its teeth, and stood and stared right at him, standing up erect on two legs, before finally growling this deep primal growl and then bounding off over the fence down away into the woodline. And while he definitely recounted being completely terrified in the moment, at that point in his life, he had already had so many other supernatural experiences that he did recount being somewhat unfazed by it, because he's like, yeah, they're real. I know they're very real. This was just another confirmation that what I saw was one of these things. And since this experience was after the first, I can't help but personally wonder if that maybe somehow whatever entity he saw in the very first story had possibly attached itself to him, or if that even was a part of the equation, or maybe some people just act as supernatural beacons where they just have a host of all sorts of strange sightings and experiences that they can't explain. And over time, they have so many, like Ted, they just become, I don't want to say desensitized, because that's not the right word. You're still terrified if you have these experiences, but it just happens so much that you kind of, like Ted describes, you just kind of become unfazed by it. Either way, there is no conclusive evidence that what he saw is a dogman, a supernatural entity, whatever you want to call it, it is still a mystery. And while we're on the topic of all these strange supernatural phenomena happening within New Jersey, I want to turn our attention to another very strange area also within New Jersey, the Round Valley Reservoir. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, since 1971, so many missing persons have occurred in this place, a multitude of disappearances, and at least 26 counted deaths, that it's actually earned the nickname the Bermuda Triangle of New Jersey, believe it or not. In fact, one of the first and most famous missing person cases in this reservoir area was Thomas Tremblett and his brother-in-law, Christopher, who were casually out just fishing, doing what any normal dudes would do on a beautiful day, out in their 12-foot aluminum boat, just enjoying the beautiful scenery and just hanging out and just having camaraderie, family camaraderie, when at some point or another, their boat just inexplicably capsized, and as you know it, their bodies were never recovered. Ever. In fact, after extensive search and rescue efforts were done, all they can find was 2 life jackets, an oar, some tackle. That was it. No sign of the bodies whatsoever. So it really makes you wonder what happened. How is that they just vanished without a trace? And it wasn't long after that cases of people just not just vanishing, but mysteriously vanishing without a trace began to just trickle and pour in. And I want you guys to understand that this isn't just the reservoir causing this, it's the whole area surrounding it where these things are happening. In fact, things get even stranger, because only 4 years after the disappearance of those 2 men in the fishing boat, 2 other men, Craig Steer and Andrew Fasanella, were walking casually along the northern shoreline, where they just vanished without a trace. Literally in the blink of an eye, just gone. Nobody can find out what happened to them. Nobody can come up with any sort of rational explanation why they vanished, where they would have vanished to, but they never returned. And in fact, it was only a few days after that they had been reported missing is when their canoe washed on shore, completely empty, devoid of any signs or details of what could have happened to them or the whereabouts of their bodies. And to this day, just like the other 2 men in the 12-foot aluminum boat, no one has found their bodies. On March 14th, 1989, a man by the name of John Kubu and Albert Lawson also mysteriously vanished while on a fishing trip on this lake. Clearly, this reservoir isn't safe for fishing. Now, Lawson's body would eventually be recovered in 1993, but John's never was. Now, of course, from there, reports only get more and more bizarre, like this one. On October 22nd of 1993, a man by the name of Jeffrey Moore, who's only 27, and his good friend Raymond Barr were actually out on the lake for a very warm, wonderful, relaxing day of fishing, enjoying themselves, when completely out of nowhere, like the other 2 men, their boat just for whatever reason decides to completely capsize, But here is the strange part. The conditions in which they inexplicably capsized were very calm, very clear, and there were many other boaters around them that could clearly see what had happened. And so everybody in the vicinity completely panics, and one of the nearby boaters, of course, rushes over to try and give his aid, and he's actually able to pull up Barr from the water and rescue him. But Moore, for whatever reason, was nowhere to be found, despite extensive searching of the entire area. It's as if his body just completely vanished, and even now his body has never ever been recovered, and for whatever reason, there's never been a single trace of him, or I should say whatever became of him. Now, due to these strange mysteries, there has been so much time and attention and attempts to try and get to the bottom, no pun intended, of what is happening at the Round Valley Reservoir and why there are so many missing persons and deaths. In fact, many attempts to even locate any of the missing has yet to prove successful. In fact, the community was so baffled by this and so determined to get to the bottom of things that in 1977, a battery-powered submersible, which you would typically see these sort of things used for oil rigs, was actually brought out to the lake to look at the bottom in search of any of these missing bodies. I mean, certainly there has to be some trace of these fishermen. I mean, it's just not possible that they're disappearing without a trace. Now, I also want to state here that this submersible at the time in 1977 was completely state-of-the-art, and at the time piloted by a very, very experienced, seasoned operator, a man by the name of Andre Gallern, and this was also the same man who had worked with a deep-sea explorer, Jacques Cousteau, and yet even after an entire week of draining, exhausting, searching all throughout the bottom of the reservoir, there were no bodies found. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew how to account for all these mysterious disappearances and deaths. It was completely baffling. However, fast forward almost 20 years later, and in 1999, there were state troopers who decided to get involved, and specifically ones who were trained in underwater recovery. And they would spend a lot of their time meticulously hunting for bodies in the very bottom of the lake and searching and scouring, but even these men could not find anything. And again, in 2006, the community refused to give up, using another state-of-the-art submersible, but yet again, there was nothing. No remains of any kind were ever found. Now, I want you to keep in mind that there have also been extensive and numerous land search efforts going on as well, and a perfect example is when the water levels actually recede down, their search efforts would actually include cadaver dogs that cannot just sniff out, well, obviously cadavers, but things like pieces of bone, tissue, scraps of clothing that may or may not have belonged to any of the missing along this water line that was currently receding, and yet still nothing gave results. However, it's not all doom and gloom, because as of 2013, there have been a few bodies, a few missing people that have actually been recovered. A perfect example is a fisherman by the name of Kenneth Roatan, who was 56 and was actually discovered in about 70 feet of water. Apparently, the story goes that the state police marine unit actually picked up a very strange anomalous reading on their sonar equipment, and so they immediately decided to go have it checked out and sent in recovery divers to look for what was sending this anomalous signal, and sure enough, they find his body. Now, the backstory on this particular fisherman is that apparently he had been fishing out in his canoe only roughly 20 or so yards away from the shore when he mysteriously vanished. Now, as to the state patrol and the divers who found his body, they're completely baffled as to how he had somehow fallen into the water. But maybe, just maybe, the lake isn't as supernatural as we might think. In 1989, there were actually 2 amateur divers who were roughly, at the time, about 50 or so feet down in the lake when they came upon the remains of a fisherman who had gone missing in 1976. And in fact, they ran across his entire human skeleton, and there's still little bits of tissue on him, and he was still in his rubber boots and bits of tattered clothing. It was pretty gruesome. And in fact, it was only roughly within 11 months from that same discovery that another fisherman who had vanished around that same time was also discovered in an almost identical state. Now, of course, just due to the very nature of all these strange disappearances and drownings and deaths, there's been a lot of speculation that this place is either cursed or haunted, or at least watched over by vengeful spirits of some kind. In fact, there are those who believe that this particular reservoir was actually constructed over sacred native burial grounds, and because of this defilement, is forever cursed with this sort of bad energy that surrounds it. Now, what's very interesting about this particular reservoir is that there's this legend that there's actually an entire ghost town at the bottom of the reservoir. And I'm talking like buildings, homes, fences, silos, roads, trees, I mean, you name it. And of course, this might be possible just because at the time, there was a lot of hesitancy from people in the area who refused to give up their land and sell it to the government. But the government wanted to go ahead and flood this area when they made plans for it to take care of the water shortage issue and put this reservoir into effect. So it is possible that things got flooded out, and that when the state did eventually move in and, begin plucking up properties left and right, that residents possibly faced the worst ultimatum that they either have to move their homes at their own expense, like the government usually does, or just leave them to rot, and in this case, underneath the reservoir. Now, personally, I seriously doubt that's even a thing, and that I seriously doubt that that would even contribute to any of the missing disappearances or deaths at all, but you never know. Now, one theory that I've heard is actually really interesting and unfortunately isn't as exciting as death, curses, and underwater ghosts, but it actually talks more about the geography of the area. For you see, this particular valley reservoir is actually right in the middle of what you would describe as a circular valley. Now, this kind of valley actually gives way to producing what you could describe as these powerful gusts of wind that can be magnified within the confines of the reservoir. And these winds can get so powerful, they can get up to like 40 miles an hour or more and are capable of whipping out of nowhere. And when you have these kind of sudden gusts of wind blowing through, this in turn could, I guess, produce surprising waves that could perhaps be responsible for some of these boats capsizing, maybe, maybe not. Now, one other thing to keep in mind too is that the lake itself is frigid. It is so very cold. And if you're talking about water that's near freezing, well, we all know how quickly hypothermia can kick in and just what it can do to the human body and how quickly it can kill you. I really don't think a lot of us need a science lesson on that. But the cold water could explain some of the mysterious disappearances, because you think, when the water's that cold, it could kind of fend off the gases that naturally come with decomposition. And when that happens, bodies tend to float towards the surface. But if the water's that cold and decomposition is slowed down dramatically, then, well, the gases wouldn't normally allow the body to float, and instead they would just stay submerged, unlikely to ever be found. But come on, looking at things from the logical perspective is never fun or exciting. And while it's very possible the things I just listed could help explain some of the disappearances, it unfortunately doesn't explain all of them. And there are many more people that believe that there are evil entities at work and that the entirety of the reservoir area is cursed and that you are doomed to suffer a terrible fate. And of course, you should approach at your own risk. Look, all I can personally say is there's something strange going on because, all right, look, I will say this, that judging by the sheer volume of deaths and mysterious disappearances, I mean, it's even earned itself the nickname, like I said, the Bermuda Triangle of New Jersey. There's clearly something going on, but what? We don't know. It unfortunately remains a mystery. Now, moving away from the reservoir, I wanted to bring our attention back to the Pine Barrens just for a little bit and talk about some of the strange supernatural entities that are said to exist there. I mean, that's why you clicked on the video, right? Skinwalkers in New Jersey. I mean, come on, it's a no-brainer. We all love this stuff. What's interesting to me about the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, it is one of the most rural locations in all of New Jersey. But I guess that's not really saying a lot because it's not like New Jersey's huge by any stretch of the means. The place just has this ominous, very ominous vibe. And speaking of ominous is the legend that supposedly took place in this very location. Well, not this location, but the Pine Barrens. You see, the story goes like this, and that in 1735, a pregnant woman was about to give birth to her 13th child. In fact, her name was Mother Leeds and actually cursed her soon-to-be-born child as the devil. Now, the story continues, and the legend has it that the baby came out of Mother Leeds looking relatively normal, like a sweet little baby, and then it grew into this monstrous demonic entity with a long outstretched head and long bat-like wings, and it flew around the room and eventually flew out off into the night sky to wreak havoc and do whatever demonic duties it was responsible for. But not before this demonic entity had completely slaughtered the midwife that had apparently helped bring this child into the world, and all the parents could do is just watch in horror as this sweet baby turned into this demonic terror and then fled out and was gone into the night. Now, what's most disturbing about the Jersey Devil is this wasn't just a one-time thing. Many people since then in the last 280 years alone have had countless sightings or supposed sightings of this same entity. And in fact, supposedly Joseph Bonaparte even had his own sighting. That, and of course the whole area around the Pine Barrens has seen its fair share of strange phenomena that many people believe is directly tied to the Jersey Devil. I'm talking about things that are very in the realm of X-Files, strange noises, animal tracks that cannot be identified, dead livestock, farmers hearing things that go bump in the night that can't be explained, and just a host of other strange things that again are believed to be tied directly to the Jersey Devil. Now, if we fast forward a bit to 1909, the Jersey Devil would completely terrorize the entire community and resurface once more, because when it reappeared, it didn't just reappear once for one person or one family, it reappeared statewide and even into a little bit of eastern Pennsylvania. Apparently in Haddon Heights around the same time, a trolley car was reported being attacked by a strange demonic bat-like creature that many people saw and believed to be the Jersey Devil. And just across the Delaware River in Bristol, Pennsylvania, a similar situation had happened. Several police officers were firing at this flying demonic bat-like creature as it flew over, and they're shooting at it. People are screaming and freaking out. There's this unknown entity in the sky, and they don't know what it could be. Many of them assumed that it was the devil itself, and all of them noticed that their mere mortal bullets were having no effect on this creature, whatever it was. In fact, there were so many sightings of the Jersey Devil around this time that it caused mass panic. And similar to the 1967 collapse of the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the whole Mothman thing, many people of the time believed that this was a harbinger of doom, death, and destruction to come. And it was so severe and shook the community so badly that schools closed, businesses closed, people were terrified to conduct social gatherings or any sort of business deals or even leave their house at all. It was a pretty big deal for the time, but unfortunately, or I guess for us, fortunately, we haven't had that sort of sighting since then. And of course, in the years past, we're at like 115 years now since then, there have been many people who have come along who've tried so hard to prove the Jersey Devil is a hoax, but have been unable to, because there have still been so many frequent sightings of seeing an entity like this in the area that many believe the Jersey Devil is alive and well. And of course, I can give you a several hour spending episode on the Jersey Devil alone, but I feel like this little tidbit of information is very appropriate for where it's at in this episode. Now, while we're on the topic of spiritual entities, not all of them are supposedly bad. In fact, many of the Quakers back in the day, many of them reported seeing what they would describe as a large white stag that they believed had good or godly spiritual powers or some sort of aura around it. Unfortunately, since the white stag isn't as exciting as the Jersey Devil, there's probably a lot more rational explanations for it, but back in the day, it was heavily seen as an omen of good fortune, or at least protection for some. Now, since we're on the topic of Pine Barrens, it couldn't be complete without talking about Big Ol' Red Eye. Now, if you're not familiar with the area, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but if you are, then you do. You see, back in the 1970s, residents of the area in the Pine Barrens and surrounding area became aware of some strange beast that they would recall as having large red eyes and this massive, hulking 8, 9, 10 foot tall creature lurking in the woods that many believe was just an alpha male Bigfoot, but that it has very dangerous and sinister qualities to it. In fact, many would describe it emitting this horrendous demonic scream that will chill you to the bone when heard. And in fact, a man by the name of Tom Card, who is a retired park ranger, and at the time when he was working along with 2 other park rangers, they all heard this horrific scream emitted by this creature that sent them running to the hills. I mean, if you want to look at it geographically, there is over 2 million acres of forest land, so hiding in it would, well, be pretty easy, I guess.
Lenape.
Now, what's also interesting to me is the Lenape tribe, otherwise more commonly known as the Delaware natives, spoke of a horrific creature that sounds pretty similar to Bigfoot. They would describe it as the Wematigunus. Think of it like a dwarven Bigfoot almost, kind of their version of little people. And supposedly that if you kept your distance from them, they would tolerate you and be benevolent and everything would be okay. But if you got on their bad side, well, you can kind of see where this is going to go. And there's even a legend surrounding it that apparently a group of hunters had experienced these small, strange creatures one fall or winter when hunting. Apparently, a hunter had got lost from his group and wandered off, killed a deer in the process. And in the process of going to get the deer and he's looking for his companions, he hears this strange mocking voice call out to him. And so he's carrying this deer and he could not for the life of him figure out where this disembodied voice is coming from, and he's crisscrossing the valley, he's looking all over, and finally the legend goes that he gets so angry he throws the deer down and eventually comes face to face with one of these creatures who apparently laughs in his face and claims that they only kept calling his name to see how long he would keep looking for it. Strange, isn't it? And lastly, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about an Air Force pilot who had a strange encounter with a UFO over Atlantic City in New Jersey back in 2018. Check this one out. Back in September 16th in 2018, an unidentified pilot was flying a Diamond DA-40 light aircraft when something strange and out of the ordinary had happened. He was at merely 2,000 feet above Atlantic City, New Jersey, and seen something that he couldn't, well, quite rationalize. What he would describe as a UFO. Now, at first, he just simply likened it to that of a weather balloon or something of some kind, but this thing actually climbed an elevation with him. He would even describe it having a strange V-shaped antenna coming off of it and a large payload at the bottom. He even went into detail how this supposed craft would actually outmaneuver his private plane. Even the air traffic controller would say, like, hey, you're kind of rattled by this, aren't you? Well, you're not the first one to experience this. Calm down. Now, I'm going to give full credit here to a website called The Drive, who did an amazing job dissecting every little piece of this down to the nitty-gritty, looking through every nook and cranny. Now, what's really interesting, again, credit to The Drive for this, is that there's actually FAA record of other strange UAS in the area. For those that don't know, UAS is Unmanned Aerial System. Now, there's actually a supposed connection here all the way to a man by the name of Riley Lee Martin. And this is a man who he claimed was abducted by aliens at the age of 7 in 1953. And his claim is that he was taken from his bedroom, I assume, in Arkansas and taken to these aliens' mothership near the planet Saturn. Apparently, the story goes that he was then abducted a second time at the age of 18, where these supposed aliens had put a headset on him and had downloaded over 144,000 symbols into his brain. Also, but not limited to, the entire history of humanity, language, alien insights, and more. In fact, Riley would refer to these beings as Biavians, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and apparently they are from the Taurus constellation or somewhere in around there. I think specifically from the planet Biava. Now, this isn't some kook who just come out of the woodworks with a story to share. This is a very notable individual, and he's been on shows like The Howard Stern Show, Coast to Coast AM, and of course The Jerry Springer Show, and even his own show. Unfortunately, he has since passed away in December of 2015. Going back real quick to this unidentified pilot and the supposed UFO that he saw, is it likely that he somehow just saw a military drone of some kind? But he doesn't think so. And the reason being is that the FAA spent a complete ludicrous amount of time really heavily studying and documenting it. So it really makes us wonder, why were they so interested in this supposed weather balloon or drone, and what exactly were its true intentions, and was it a UFO at all? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Unfortunately, the conclusion is up in the air, and it's a mystery. And because you guys have made it this far into the episode, you guys have endured a lot. I want you to all comment down below, let's go to Joyzy, so that way I know who made it to the end of the episode. And if you guys enjoyed today's episode, be sure to go ahead and slap that like and subscribe button for more giant long episodes like this, because, you know, this is kind of an experiment, and well, if this episode is well received and takes off, I might just be switching to these long formats because I can cover so much in them, and, you know, more people see it, so that's always a plus. As always, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next episode. Oh, and also, don't forget to like and subscribe. I don't know if I said that yet, but yeah, love you all. See you guys later.